Bonjour, welcome everyone. My name is Colin Baril. I'm Director of Alumni Engagement and Community Partnerships at the Telfer School of Management. I'll be your host and chat moderator today. The Telfer School has a strong history of organizing and delivering activities to engage alumni and to provide alumni and the business community with opportunities to learn about and explore important topics of interest. These Telfer Talks, as we call them, are now being delivered virtually through webinars such as this. Our tradition is to recite the Indigenous affirmation before every event. As most of the panel here today is in Ottawa, we'll begin with this statement. So we pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous peoples in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. Now, before we begin the session, I'd like to say a few things about the webinar. So please note the webinar will be presented in English. However, we'll be accepting questions in both languages and may translate as needed. The event is being recorded and the webinar will be emailed out to all participants in the following days, and it will include both English and French subtitles for accessibility. Please use the question and answer feature of the webinar here today to add comments, react to other messages, and submit your own questions for the Q&A portion of the session today. So with that, we can begin. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Lysanne Lessard. Lysanne is the Assistant Professor of Information Systems at the Telfer School of Management. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses on the choice, role, and impacts of information technology in organizations and on health informatics. So now I'd like to pass it over to her to kick things off, introduce our speakers for today. Lysanne?
Thank you, Colin. It is my pleasure to introduce our two distinguished speakers for today's Telfer Talk. They bring a very rich experience to the topic of IT strategy. Our first speaker, Elizabeth Rhodenizer, is the Chief Information Officer at the Public Service Commission of Canada. She's a board director for the Not-for-Profit Association, DPI, has previously sat on the advisory board of a Silicon Valley startup, and is an active member of the CIO Strategy Council. Our second speaker today will be Paul Vallée. He is the founder and CEO of Tehama and a serial entrepreneur who has spent his career at the forefront of cutting-edge technologies that enable the exchange of work over the internet. We will be sharing his bio in a written form once he will be presenting. On to Elizabeth now.
Thank you so much. So great to be here this afternoon to talk about this IT strategy of the future. If you could go to the next slide for me, Jen, please. I really think this quote is not only so important for organizations and IT, but more so today than ever. It is not the strongest of the organizations that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. If just 4 months ago, people would say that our IT strategies would be flipped on their head and accelerated in ways that we never thought could move this fast, I don't think many of us would have truly believed that would happen, but it has. And this pandemic has shown us, not only in the public sector, but also the private sector, how fundamental it is that we do come together and respond to the change in front of us. Next slide, Jen, please. So I want to talk a bit about IT strategy and digital strategy, because in the Government of Canada, have really made a shift to digital strategy. So what does that mean? Why is that different? So first and foremost, the whole why of what we're doing is very much to meet the raised expectations for services for Canadians. So that is really the starting point. So it doesn't start with technology, it actually starts with the needs of our clients, of our users, and that is the Canadians. We also take a look at, from when we talk about digital strategy, from the users from end to end. So it's not just the users receiving the service or the program at the end, but it is all those administrators, program users, and then the back end support as well. So really taking it from end to end, because you don't want to have something so efficient for your clients or your Canadians, but then has a lot of administrative overhead on the back end. So it's something that we're looking to throughout the process, if you will, or the workflow. But when we look at digital strategy as well, which is not something that we've been doing previously with IT strategy, it's all about the culture. And the culture is no longer in the CIO shop. The culture today now goes beyond that. It is the culture of the organization. It is the program sector and the business lines and IT, all of us working together. And practices and processes and workflows and business is at the forefront of whatever we're doing when it comes to delivering on our IT strategy. It is no longer go get me, I need a server or I need to have XYZ technology, but we have to look at it holistically. So we have to take into account, even from the tech side, work with our partners to understand business process flows as well. And data and information today is actually the core of pretty much all organizations. It is the data information that not only do we run our services and programs on, but it's the heart of what we do. And then you see technology coming in. So from an IT strategy where IT and tech would be very much at the forefront, technology very much still important, but it's not the only, that's not the star of the show, if you will. Also, trust. Security and privacy remain today, as we still looked at it in IT strategy, but for a digital strategy, the privacy and security are at the design phase and the conceptualization phase of whether it's a service or a program or an application, whatever it is we may be doing, and accessibility as well. Again, at the forefront of our design and thinking about user experience. So there is a big shift in government from going from just IT strategy to where we're all shifting to digital strategy. Jen, next slide, please. So when we think about strategy and emerging tech, the very first thing that I think about is leadership. Who is actually driving the adoption of the emerging tech? Is it the CIO shop? Is it the tech experts? Is it the business? Because ideally, it has to be both together. When we think about leadership and ensuring that we are on the same page, it also feeds into whether we're going for a big bang approach or incremental progress. And the culture in government right now is very much on incremental progress and proving actually what we're doing along the way to gain that momentum. When we look at emerging tech, we need to understand it as well. It can't be a black box where we don't understand what's happening inside. You can see government has the algorithmic impact assessment. So ensuring that it's ethical and value-based and has the human and public interest in mind is very important for us in government. Also, you want to look at what is the impact on the ecosystem. Very few organizations today have brand new, state-of-the-art, nothing but the best and the newest in their organization. Many of us have legacy, and we have to look at our ecosystems from end to end. So where it has to connect, integration points, and the emerging tech that we're bringing into our organizations to deliver services. As well as, again, accessibility, security, and privacy always at the forefront and of emerging tech. So there can be some questions about that, because depending on how emerging it is, how many people understand it at that point. So we need to make sure our people can get ramped up on what that means and the impacts. And we always need to look at the capacity. This is where both the capacity from the financial skills and our people. We need to have people who can actually help work through the emerging tech we want to adopt and all of the aspects that come with that, and the skill to maintain it and continue to adopt it going forward. But then there's also the financial aspect. And that's where in the next point, when we go from capital expenditure to operational expenditure. If you're going to increase your operational expenditure to either have SaaS, software as a service, or cloud going forward, you need to take that into your overall strategy and make sure you're forecasting for that from the future. And if your budget is not going to expand to accommodate for that, how are you going to make it fit into the budget? Because day after day, no matter what, we have to keep the lights on. So that is just a bit of some considerations when you look at emerging tech and how it fits into your strategy. And the one thing I just want to go back, and actually this is fine, I can do it here, thanks Jen, is using cloud as an example. When we use cloud and talk about business benefits and going back to leadership of emerging tech, who's asking for it? It's fundamental that when we look at the leadership or the business benefits, we are taking the emergency tech and tying it back into the business strategy of the organization. Again, we don't want to, and we're not in a business of just doing tech for doing tech. It's always for the betterment or the progress of the organization and how we're helping to meet those outcomes and goals. So using cloud as an example, it's the business benefits we focus on. Because I will tell you from personal experience, if you bring your program partners and business partners in to talk about cloud itself as a technology, it isn't of importance for them, whether it's cloud or another emerging tech. What is important is time to market, the speed at which we can make changes or advance an application or a service for them. That is fundamental for them. The technology part of themselves, they trust in CIO organizations and the experts in order to Sherpa them or champion them through that. The analysis. When we talk about cloud, one thing is for sure. When we think about our legacy applications, we don't want to just lift and shift a legacy application and put it into the cloud. We need to make sure we're doing cost analysis because the design of the past is no longer designed for cloud. So looking at elasticity and understanding in depth the performance of our applications. And we want to look when we're looking at cloud as an emerging technology, if you will, that it's an incremental progress. So we want to make sure that we start small, put a workload up there and show success. And that promotes actually an excitement and a hope, not only in your technical team, but in your business when you show them actually what it can do. Skills and resources. From a government perspective, when we had the creation of Shared Services Canada, we took a lot of this back-end management and sent those resources and skills over to Shared Services Canada in order to set up what's fundamental to the organization operation of government as a whole. So today with this emerging tech of cloud, we need to now rebuild and recruit in some cases the skills and resources needed to operate in the cloud. Security and connectivity. In government, we have guardrails. We have a lot of guardrails so that we know for Protected B Cloud, for example, what we need to put in place from a security perspective. And we have great leadership out of SSC, Shared Service Canada, Communication Security Establishment, and Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada in order to help us so that each department doesn't have to go and rebuild that. But if you're in the private sector, where are your guardrails and how are you going to leverage the work of others in order to make sure you are safe in the cloud or with whatever enriching technology you're using? Privacy, again, comes to data residency and sovereignty and privacy. So you want to make sure you take a look at that. Very important for us in the government, as well as data and information management. It goes back to data and information being the heartbeat of the organization and importance. And if you're going into the cloud, what does it mean for your data and your information management, but also the eradication of the information if and when you ever want to make sure or retrieve your information and ensure that it's gone. And again, going back to the ecosystems, the cloud to ground connectivity. For us, those access points in between to make an end-to-end service continue to deliver on a program, we need to make sure that cloud to ground connectivity is secured and in place to maintain that service. Next slide, Jen. So that was a very quick kind of overview because never has it been a better time to be in tech or digital or even in a place where you want to advance the agenda of your organization. It is so fundamental, and I am happy that Telfer has done this because it's so important for not only business to have an appreciation for tech, but for tech to have an appreciation for business. And in the end, for both of us to come together to advance our strategies and create great results with tech of today and emerging tech of tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Sorry. We will now be going to our second speaker, Paul Vallée. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
So, can everyone hear me? Can I get a thumbs up, Jen? Awesome. So, welcome everyone. Maybe a quick biographical notes before I dive into the content, because it comes on pretty fast and furious right after this. I was the founder of a data services company called Pythian. And Pythian became one of the larger data infrastructure and cloud transformation and data footprint transformation businesses. And at Pythian, I needed to manage a team of several hundred engineers who were working from home all over the world and connecting their work into our customers' infrastructure. And so in order to solve for that problem, we built a technology called Tehama. This deck is not really about Tehama, although I do have a couple slides at the end that I included for when I know that this is going to get emailed out to each of the attendees. You'll have it in your records. So if we can go to the first slide now, Jen, please. So this is a slide that I have essentially to introduce the idea that what's happening right now is something that's been predicted for a long time. This is actually one of my old slides. I've been giving this slide for a number of years. Today, almost no one sees this and is surprised and is amazed because everything has changed in the last few months as a result of the COVID-19 related work from home imperatives that really started rolling out globally, starting in Asia in February. And here in Canada in March. And so essentially the reality that we did not have all our technology houses in order to rapidly send everybody home became increasingly clear. But so became clear the opportunity to build a platform that permits the exchange of work over the internet. Whether that platform is the one that I'm building at Tehama or ones that separate CIOs build independently by cobbling pieces together, there are constant themes. So if you go to the next slide, I'll start introducing what are the themes that we need to start talking about. One of the things that is a common denominator to almost every enterprise technology transformation initiative right now is the analysis of what needs to be digital and what needs to be still happen in the real world and requiring a physical interaction. You'll see that happen across every interaction that you have. For example, I don't know if any of you have gone to the dentist or gone to the optometrist in the past little while, but you will see that they are doing everything they can to move as much of the work that can be digital into the digital realm. And what that means is, in the enterprise world, a lot of new digital transformation efforts. So I would say these past 3 months has been the most rapid investment in terms of digital transformation and technology across the board. Where I specialize is at Tehama is we are building virtual offices as a service. So what we're doing is we're actually building and virtualizing the enterprise experience of issuing laptops and enabling their end users to access sensitive data systems. This means that a lot of what we're doing is amounts to bring your own PC enablement, so that the enterprise can, instead of owning laptops, issue the permission for employees to use their own laptops, even while accessing data that is governed in the very clear and diligent way that Elizabeth described. Oftentimes when an enterprise is enabling a bring your own PC or bring your own device strategy, they miss the boat on really understanding their own motivations. And what's interesting is that a lot of these motivations has changed in the last few months. Historically, enterprises were very interested in bring your own device as a way to unlock employee satisfaction. that is no longer the primary criteria. A lot of them are interested in the manageability dynamics of no longer having to manage a physical laptop. A great example of that is it was recently summer student season for all of the enterprises who employ co-ops and employ summer students. It is extremely painful when you're onboarding a summer student working from home to issue them a laptop that is under your governance framework and to ship it to them, and then 4 months later to try to get it back. And these are things that were not a problem when we were all working in offices, but are very active problems for a lot of enterprises right now. So finding savings on the cost and the manageability and the agility are key criteria for bring your own device. Interestingly enough, security and compliance has generally been bandied about as an objection to bring your own device, to have enabling people to connect to your enterprise assets through their own machines. However, there are clear approaches that permit your actual compliance posture and your security posture to be dramatically improved by not permitting, by enforcing a delivery platform. We go to the next slide. One of the important criteria when you're thinking about transforming your enterprise to permit connectivity from home is to think very clearly about the user's experience and how they interact with your business and how they interact with your entity. So what is their job function? Where in the world are they located right now, and where will you permit them to connect from? What kind of device do they have? Who owns the device that they have? How do you help fund their device investments? So for example, in the days of the early days of working from home, Ford Motor Company in Detroit was one of the first enterprises that permitted employees to work from home at all in the evenings. And at the time, it was the early 90s, and they literally had to buy a PC for those employees. If they wanted to permit them to work from home, they needed to own the machine. Over the years, people started owning machines already, and now we're still buying the machines, and they just have to, because a lot of people have their laptops already. This is already, we've been through all this with telephones as well. How do we enable access to telephones? And what kinds of applications do we need to permit access to? This differs dramatically. Some enterprises' application stacks are completely web-based, but some workloads require a physical application on the machine. For example, rendering graphics or participating in an engineering workload with AutoCAD or other such tooling often requires you to think very clearly on what it is that the user is doing. Software engineering is another workload that you need to be thinking very clearly about what does the user actually need in order to be successful. We go to the next slide. The other really important criteria, and this Elizabeth touched on this a little bit in her comments as well, is having very clear thinking on where and how far you want to extend your trust. Enterprises like to have very small and restricted trust bubbles, so that they have a very clear demarcation of trust, and they don't trust anything outside that trust bubble. However, that's a good example as to why enterprises are generally frustrated right now with the experience of owning a laptop, because that means that that machine that is in someone's physical possession in their house actually tends to store enterprise data on it, and which requires the enterprise to trust that machine, which requires them to do all kinds of things on that machine in terms of governing its configuration. That's why on Android phones, for example, you might have a work container that is separate from your home use of that Android device. On a PC, you need to do a variety of things, including endpoint device management, endpoint device observability, patch management, security management, the ability to deprovision a user remotely, and of course, the ability to recollect the machine when the user ends their employment with you. This can be extremely painful. Airbnb, for example, recently downsized and laid off 1,900 workers as a result of a serious decline in their demand for their platform post-COVID-19. You can just imagine how painful it is for that IT department to try to collect 1,900 laptops from 1,900 people living in 1,900 different addresses, each of which were recently laid off and are probably annoyed at the experience and stressed out about COVID-19. Very difficult. When you want to keep your perimeter closer to you, you end up having what's called a zero trust architecture, which means that you trust almost nothing about what's happening in the person's possession. If you think of your online banking experience, the bank does not care or know or really have any say on how well you're securing your PC. If you can access the web on that PC, you can access the bank. And they have solved for the protocols and the processes necessary to permit you to do your work by extending you very, very little actual trust beyond what you need to do to be able to perform your work. When you can imagine how an enterprise application might be transformed in a similar way to when you connect to your RBC application. When you connect to RBC, everything is authenticated. You might receive a second factor on your phone. You interact with it only over a website, and you have only permission to do the things that you require access to in order to perform your job. In an enterprise context, that kind of zero trust transformation extends exactly the same sort of dynamic to you and often requires an enterprise refactoring. There are shortcuts to achieve zero trust dynamics without refactoring every application that is necessary, and they mostly involve virtual desktops or desktop as a service infrastructure. A lot of enterprises that were enabling their users through VPNs struggled quite a lot over this recent emergency transformation. I'm sure several people in the audience either themselves or had experience where we don't have enough VPN capacity for everyone to connect all day long. You must connect over only during this window of opportunity. And oftentimes when physical virtual desktop infrastructure existed behind VPN firewalls, those VPNs were croaking under the demand because having to display and transact the entire desktop through a VPN is extremely resource intensive from a CPU perspective. If we go to the next slide, please. When you want to extend trust across your enterprise, you need to be thinking about these sorts of things. So each one of these blue bubbles, you as a technology leader need to have a very clear strategy. So these are CIO oriented, call it a CIO oriented homework list. What is our strategy around endpoint security? How do we secure the actual devices that are going to be able to exchange packets on our network? How do you secure their operating system and workspace? How do you manage your identity, and how do you manage who's allowed to access your environment? Each one of these 10 bubbles, and I'm not going to go through all of them in this amount of detail, but a CIO should have a very clear answer. These are the foundational technology underpinnings that are necessary for you to resolve in order for you to confidently be able to exchange work over the internet. And a really clear solution to each of these things becomes very important. And the red bubbles create visibility and governance. One of the things that we experienced and are continuing to experience as a result of this rapid work from home rollout is a massive increase in security, phishing attacks, and other sorts of social engineering. And the reason is that the individual is used to receiving a lot of different social contextual clues of trust. The individual is used to, for example, recognizing their colleagues, or maybe seeing their badge, or maybe receiving a phone call from an internal extension. And together, along with the properly formatted request, the contextual clues give us a confidence that this is a valid request for a commercial interaction. When everyone is working from home and everyone is working remotely, the vast majority of those routine contextual clues of a trustable interaction are deprived of you. And as a result, people also need to be thinking about how do we train individuals around their vulnerability, and how do we make sure that everyone is ready to react to that. Next slide, please. Thanks, Jen. So this is a very, very quick overview of what we built at Tehama. You're probably not surprised that Tehama in a single platform has answers to all of the bubbles and all of the red stack. And so essentially what we build with Tehama is something that we call a room. If the foundational building block of the internet is the router, the foundational building block of Tehama is the room. And a room is like an airlock for data. It permits the workers working from home on the left-hand side to enter the room. Inside the room, they are perfectly productive with virtual desktops running Linux or Windows, but they also have the ability to share secrets with each other, to share files with each other, and every activity that has happened in the room has an audit trail so that we have confidence. And then we enable zero trust through the gateway appliance that is inside the customer's infrastructure on the right. So the point of this is that the room can only route packets through that gateway and only to the assets that are configured to permit access for those desktops. So if we go to the next slide, this permits a variety of different use cases. You can, for example, create a room for a function like a team. You can create a room for a project. You can create a room for a technology. Like, for example, this is where everybody who's involved in managing this SAP deployment operates. Or you can create it for a team. You can create it also for a geography. So, for example, for GDPR reasons, none of this data is allowed to leave Europe. So I've created a room in Europe and I'm importing my talent through that room. And essentially what happens thanks to the virtual desktop technology is individuals are actually interacting with the data in Europe. The virtual, everything else is like a really long monitor or keyboard or mouse cable. And so the individual who's outside Europe is able to actually interact with the data using a virtual machine in Europe. And we rely heavily on the fact that since rooms are airlocks for data, no data can escape the room. Human beings can only consume data with three interfaces: eyeballs, eardrums, and fingertips. And fingertips, of course, for reading Braille, and that's out of scope of our platform. But since we can only consume data with eyeballs and eardrums, our room only serves pixels and audio output, and it's impossible to exfiltrate data out of the room. So it's really a credible approach to creating that kind of a geographical governance as well. If we go to the next slide. Next slide again. This is just for home handout purposes. I really wanted to spend a minute on this slide, however. We have here in Ottawa, we are the birthplace of a movement called Digital by Default, which is what Toby Lutka of Shopify coins the idea that even as we return to offices, we need to start with a foundation of a digital interaction for work as opposed to a real life interaction for work. And then as a result, what's happening is that work from home used to be a perk and the office was your workplace. And that's flipping to a digital workplace being your foundational workplace and your interaction in the office being a perk. This creates an enormous amount of puzzles to solve. Everything from talent acquisition to workforce reduction to managing culture, orientation, also, of course, managing the security and compliance dynamics attached to this and the business management dynamics. So we are hosting a summit. There's 50 amazing speakers and it's perfectly free. I would love to invite the guests to attend. It's running all month of July, 2 content sessions a day. And that's the content I had for you. Thanks.
Thank you for these 2 very interesting presentations. There were 2 very different perspectives, but what I find, like maybe to sum it up, maybe is really that the future of IT strategy is digital transformation. Basically, it's not about technology per se. It's really about enabling business and people, improving services and experiences, updating platforms and ecosystem, and ensuring trustable environments. So this is definitely just the start of a conversation. Thank you so much. And now we will be going to questions provided by the public, by our audience. So the first question is, in the first phases of the design and implementation of digital strategies, what are some of the key questions to answer in relation to data analytics? How can we incorporate a data lens in the early stages of IT and digital design? I think this question would be best answered by both speakers. Actually, we may have different perspectives on it. So maybe Elizabeth to start.
Sure, thanks so much. You know, I think this is going to be different for everybody, and we have to be okay and step back and say, what is my data and information management today, right? So one organization might be light years ahead, really great creation, retention, disposition, and really understand their data. Another organization may not be at that point. So I think the very first step is making sure the organization agrees what is the state and health of our data, and take stock. What do we have to do if it's not up to the standard that we wanted? And that really has to be IT as well as the business lines, those that create it and those that use it for data analytics, because they're not always the same organization or same point. So I would say it is okay, and I think we have to be okay with saying, where are we today? Is that where we want to be as an organization with regard to the health of our data? And because if we don't do something to bring it up, the data analytics that we have or come out will not be based on either clean data or data that is holistic enough for what the questions we're trying to answer. So that would be my recommendation for a starting point, because where it takes each individual organization in their strategy will differ from the answer to that question.
I guess I'll take a crack at that. So I'm a data hoarder. I'm unabashedly the kind of person who just loves accumulating data. When you do a major digital transformation, a lot of what ends up happening is your data gets siloed because, for example, your sales data ends up in Salesforce and your messaging data ends up in Slack. And it's very important early in a project to try to decide on how you're going to glue all of your various data footprints together. The power of these digital platforms is very much that they permit workflow automation of the interactions with others necessary to achieve the result in the platform. So for example, Salesforce requires you to build a pipeline report. That pipeline report is automatically made available to your leader, who now has their regional pipeline report all the way up the food chain. And so that kind of interaction that happens natively inside the platform is very powerful. But enterprises need to be able to integrate that data with other data assets that are elsewhere, and having a very clear strategy around how do we make our data talk to each other? How do we integrate our data so that every part of our org has all the information that they need in order to collaborate? That's a really important problem to think of very early. It should be coupled with a really great data governance function, where you have a really clear inventory of all of the enterprise data that you care about. Where's the primary source of truth for any given data point, where you can rely on that data point being right, and it will be hopefully integrated through the rest of the org, but then you have a really great library understanding where your sources of truth are, and then what are the standards of care that you're promising to your stakeholders and to your org about how that data is managed and governed. So as you adopt cloud productivity and storage technologies like Box.com or Google Drive, as you adopt task management applications like Jira or Monday.com or whatever it is you're adopting, as you adopt messaging platforms like Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever else you're adopting, as you adopt meeting solutions like Zoom or digital contracts like EchoSign, what you'll see is these silos of information actually end up becoming the 1990s redux. Remember the 90s when every manager in your org had a PC under their desk and that was running a separate access database and it wasn't talking to any of the other systems? Well, I remember, it was hell. We're doing it again with our cloud and SaaS transformation, and I would say the most important thing to think about in a digital project is what is our plan for consolidating all of that data so that we have the ability for our data to interact and to de-silo our data.
Elizabeth, did you want to add something to this? You're on mute.
There we go. Okay, so I don't know why the button's not always responsive, but if I had a nickel for every time I tried to talk on mute, especially during this time. So I think Paul brings up a really great perspective. And I think from a government lens, we have in place, very strict policies and legislation that we have to look at. So, and I think one of the words I responded to or reacted to, Paul, that you mentioned was hoarding, right? And I'm like, okay, we can't hoard data. I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And that's why, and echo kind of what you were saying with regard to the streams. And I think, and maybe it's more government than necessarily private sector, but you really have to look at where is your data today. And I agree with Paul, as you move forward, as you adopt more technologies or go into the SaaS, leverage more SaaS or the cloud, you need to look at how that data is going to be leveraged or maintained or used and integrated. But it goes back for me, and just in my experience of what I've seen, yeah, we have to look at our core and we have to kind of clean up the initial of what we have today, as well as getting that aligned with where we're moving tomorrow. But without making that initial point and thinking we can just go into these other areas and kind of dispersing our information without that concerns me as well. So I think the data and what we have to do as an organization, when I look either government-wide or even private sector, as we're venturing out into these different applications and arenas, is so fundamentally important, because it comes back to data and information for all of our organizations is the heartbeat typically. So I think it's a great question. Unfortunately, not something that we could probably tackle in a short amount of time, but I think it would be really well worth it if Telfer wanted to consider another subject just on that and bringing some friends around that one.
Thank you. Definitely something to consider. La prochaine question va être en français. La question est: quel est le créneau indiqué pour le lancement d'une entreprise? Info numérique, sécurité, données ou intelligence artificielle? Alors, Paul, vu votre expérience en entrepreneuriat, peut-être que vous pourriez répondre à cette question?
Quel est le prénom? Je n'ai pas compris
exactement. Le créneau. So the créneau, the business space, if you will. Cloud.
Et puis, ils veulent qu'on discute de info-nuage, intelligence artificielle. Pour moi, l'intelligence artificielle, c'est très important. C'est très, très, très important dans ces jours-ci parce que c'est ce qui change le plus rapidement. C'est ça qui vraiment cause le plus grand risque d'un énorme impact. Un impact à l'entreprise ou à la façon dont on travaille qui pourrait vraiment tout changer. Alors, je vois comme, par exemple, dans une banque, ignorer l'intelligence artificielle, ce serait un très grand risque parce que les banques ont souvent des équipes de 500, 1000, 2000 utilisateurs qui vont faire un centre d'appel. Et ces travaux-là ont tout besoin de changer en conséquence de l'intelligence artificielle. Je dirais que c'est évident que l'info-nuage, les entreprises qui ont bien adopté l'info-nuage au cours des dernières années ont un très grand avantage au cours de ces derniers mois quand ils ont eu besoin de réagir très rapidement aux changements dans la façon de gérer leur entreprise. Alors, c'est certain que certains travaux qu'on a fait, ceux qui avaient déjà fait des travaux à l'avance ont pu réagir beaucoup plus rapidement aux circonstances d'aujourd'hui. Mais je veux aussi célébrer le fait que le besoin abrupt d'avoir besoin absolument de réagir à notre situation a aussi accéléré beaucoup de projets de transformation et puis a aussi démontré que peut-être qu'on était un peu pris dans le passé et puis qu'il fallait être poussé. Alors, on a été poussé par le virus à entreprendre beaucoup plus de transformation, beaucoup plus rapidement qu'on aurait fait si on planifiait ça de la façon ordinaire. Mais le résultat a encore été pas mal bon. Et puis, la conséquence d'avoir été poussé avec tellement de férocité est vraiment une accélération dans plusieurs entreprises. J'entends souvent, on dirait qu'on est à 2025 et non en 2020, tout d'un coup. Alors, on a plus accompli dans 3 mois sur notre plan technique qu'on avait accompli dans les années d'avant. Alors, c'est ça les pensées que j'ai tout de suite. Elisabeth, qu'est-ce que tu en dirais?
C'est une bonne question, Paul. Merci. Je pense que vraiment, c'est concernant quelle est la meilleure façon de créer ou de... And sorry, I'm just going to go to English for a second. But as I understand it, so which niche is appropriate for starting a business with regard to one of those lines, whether it's cloud computing or security? Did I understand the question correctly? I just want to make sure.
Yes, you did.
So honestly, I think today, I don't think we can pick one niche, right? So if you're going to start a business, and whether it's cloud computing, you're going to have to make sure security is there, as well as what you're going to do in considerations for the data or the AI that will be leveraged more and more as we advance into accelerated technologies. So I think, you know, and Paul is much more better positioned than I am to answer this from a private sector perspective, but it all goes back to value added. So if the business is, what is value added is the business going to provide that's not being provided now, or if there's a market it's going to corner on. Donc, désolé de ne pas répondre en français.
J'ajouterais peut-être que dans un entrepreneur d'aujourd'hui n'est pas capable de vraiment séparer l'infonuage de l'intelligence artificielle dans ses produits. Tous les produits, tous les nouveaux produits ont besoin d'avoir une bonne et belle réponse à comment est-ce que je peux débloquer notre opportunité de créer un avantage avec les données qu'on produit ou les données qu'on accumule grâce à notre investissement. Alors, en réalité, tous les produits, inclus le mien, on a besoin de faire des investissements en intelligence artificielle pour avoir un peu pour bâtir du momentum dans notre opportunité commerciale.
Merci beaucoup. That's actually your answer, the perfect segue to the next question. Thank you for the very interesting questions being submitted, by the way. So the next question is, COVID-19 has enabled major digital transformations that many executives dreamt of for years and could not achieve due to roadblocks, for example, culture and funds. What are you doing to ride that momentum for digital transformation in a post-COVID-19 world and not face the same typical roadblocks regarding culture, funds, etc.? So I think you're both, Elizabeth and Paul, are very have spoken a bit to this point already. But maybe Elizabeth, you want to start? You'd like to expand on this first?
Yeah. So it's really interesting if I take a look at our organization and my teams in particular before COVID, and some work that we were doing on looking to see how we could advance the health of our organization and our teams and our culture, and where we are today. So that work started just before COVID happened, engaged with a private sector consultant, did interviews, had high level. COVID happened. And I'll tell you, with COVID, what we did is came together as one team. Our traditional silos, how we worked, we pivoted immediately. Within 24 hours, we knew which services could not be given remotely. And then we took less than a week to get those services to be fully remote. So I think, you know, I'm not even looking post-COVID. We are now actively in the middle of looking at what are those successes that we gained in the first 10 weeks, which we had some. Why did we gain those successes? And we've dovetailed it with the work that started just before COVID happened. And what we're coming out with is, how are we going to change as an operations? And I'll tell you, even though our people are tired and exhausted, given kind of the demands on them, they are hopeful and they are delivering and they feel connected to one another and their business line. And it's been such an amazing experience for us that we are taking action now to make sure wherever we have to nudge our operations or change or evolve, that we're doing it now while we're still in COVID. Because I think that is the key to post-COVID success, is that we just start making those adjustments as we see them now. But also, we're not going to be able to change everything. So we're prioritizing how we're doing that, but we're still keeping the connection, working very closely together from a one team perspective, and broke down those silos. And it's been really good, not only for our teams and our employees, but our business partners who are seeing the results, who are seeing the difference, who are working with our frontline folks. It's been really great. So.
Thank you. Paul?
My perspective is obviously on a completely different scale than Elizabeth's. So even before Tehama was founded, Tehama is like a 65-person company today. But even before Tehama was founded inside Pythian was maybe a 500-person company when it included Tehama inside it. So this is a completely different scale than Elizabeth. So take my stuff. You should listen to Elizabeth. However, I will say this. I think we have overestimated how difficult it is to move into something new, and we have underestimated the problems with the status quo. And if I look at across the industry, including my customers, almost to an enterprise, every last one says things like, well, we hadn't done this last year when we wanted to, but we hadn't done it because we had these unsolved problems. And what they didn't recognize is that you can move into the new and tackle the unsolved problems instead of staying in the old and tackling the problems attached to your status quo. The idea that a transformation requires you to solve all of the future problems in order for you to enact it is clearly shown to be false by the last few months. And so if there's one thing that I would try to cement in terms of my own psychology is to just be a little bit bolder. And when I see things that are problematic in the status quo, and I see that there are other businesses that have solved these problems in kind of a new generation architecture, I'm going to be a bit more forceful. I'm going to be like, well, no, we're going to go into the new because I'd rather solve the problems in the new than continue to deal with the problems in the old while trying to get every last duck in a row. You'll never get every last duck in a row. And I think the forcing function of the virus, one thing I would say as a leader is it doesn't need to be a virus to force you into the new. It could be an act of leadership too. And as a leader, I think it's important for me to realize that the forcing function can be me. And I'm the one who's responsible to push the business into the new and work on the new problems instead of leave the business in the old and continue to live with those challenges.
Thank you. Another question for Paul this time. Paul, how do new platforms such as Microsoft Office 365 play into the trust bubble? Office 365 allows users to log in onto the company portal, but still cannot control aspects, for example, an employee capturing data via screenshot from their Office 365 Outlook account onto their non-managed device.
Yeah, so the typical answer to this is not a product of mine, but this is called a iGel UD Pocket. Does everybody see it? It's a little tiny USB key, and it has what's called a software-defined endpoint on it. You insert it into any laptop, and you boot off of it. And all it really does is presents you a login to Tehama, or it can be actually login to your enterprise's Citrix or a login to anything. But when you boot off of it, it gives you a first boot experience, a little bit like an iPad might. Or a new Apple laptop, it basically gets you onto the Wi-Fi. And once you're on the Wi-Fi, there's nothing this thing does. It just logs you into your virtual desktop in the cloud. Thanks to the fact that the software-defined endpoint doesn't permit screenshots, that means that you can easily configure your virtual desktop to only permit connectivity from this endpoint. And then you can boot off this endpoint, which means that you can now disable screenshots. It doesn't disable somebody taking their camera out of their pocket and taking a picture of the screen. We are working on technology that would permit that, but it does require virtual reality and the next generation headsets that have inward-facing iris scanners. And the way that will work is probably not for 18 months. Don't hold your breath. But the way that will work is we'll be looking for irises we'll be looking for retinas that include your iris around it. And if another lens sneaks in, like if you imagine somebody were to try to sneak in another lens, we would find one that doesn't have your retina around it, and we just blank the screen. And in that mechanism, we would be able to create a secure chain of data and only talk to the eyeball meat-based interface. So long as you're talking to a digital interface and it can be witnessed by another device, you can always be able to take somebody to pull out their phone from their pocket and take a screenshot. It is a problem. It's a big enough problem that we need to work on it.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. I hadn't thought of that issue. The next question I think would be maybe best answered by Elizabeth. In the modern public service environment in Canada and Ottawa, there's a struggle to attract and retain the requisite talent to effectively develop analytics capacity from both a data science and IT infrastructure building perspective. Layer on top of that our centralized delivery model through Shared Service Canada, and it can be both difficult to build the IT infrastructure and hire the right people to assist with implementation of innovation. Are there any more specific design tips for attracting and retaining core IT talent?
So this is a subject near and dear to my heart. When we look at whether it's data scientists or IT specialists, especially IT specialists, absolutely, the supply does not meet the demand of both public sector and private sector. So I'm going to focus just on what can we do to attract and retain. I think first and foremost, we really need to look and review at our interview process. And I will be very open, our demographic of gender identification is not where it should be even in my own teams. But we absolutely have to look at unconscious bias in interviews. We have to look at, you know, some of the expectations. If somebody is coming with a PhD and an undergrad in computer science, and they might not have one language that we expect or the years, but they have the ability and they've proven in other languages, then where's our latitude for accepting that? And I think it's so important. I'll share with you, there is one thing that myself at the PSC plus 9 other CIOs have come together to form a partnership with a university in the East Coast. And what this is doing is we're trying to bring and share lessons learned with the workforce of the future and support the workforce of the future. So it's a pilot. We've come together to see what we can do in 12 months. We've had on sessions about women in IT. We've had sessions about breaking barriers and perspectives or myths about coming to work in government, because I think that's an aspect of it too, because people don't necessarily think of government today being innovative, being open, having great opportunities and training. So we've been working together on that. We're working together on doing case studies on large project and digital transformation, so we can take what we've learned in government, and you know what, it always hasn't been great, but take those lessons and teach it or share it with the workforce of tomorrow. Because whether these students come and work with us in government or with Paul in the private sector, we want people who understand the challenges that we've already lived, and we want to share that. Because whether they're building us directly or if we're contracting out or leveraging a private sector application, it all comes together. Also looking at the culture internally, looking at the culture when we talk about retention, taking a pulse of how is the team doing, what is the culture. And sometimes it's tough to stop and actually do that because it might not be all great. And that's what we've done earlier this calendar year, is do just that. And you know what, it's not always what we want to hear, but sometimes we need to hear that in order to advance the culture and make sure that our employees are empowered and they're getting the training or they feel heard. So I think as this is something that I truly think both public and private sector have to come together on. We need more students to go in and actually take, whether it's data science or information technology, and actually get educated so they can come in and help us build and expand and evolve. But we also need to not forget about our current workforce and those that might be interested in pivoting and doing a career switch. So this is a significant challenge for all of us, but I'm confident that when and we come together to solve problems that we can make headway here.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question in French. Est-ce que l'arrivée du 5G et l'orientation vers l'intelligence artificielle va imposer des changements majeurs au niveau des TI? Quelle est, à votre avis, la meilleure stratégie à mettre en place pour faire face à ce genre de changement technologique? Alors, Paul, s'il vous plaît, si vous pouvez prendre cette question, on a juste 1 minute pour terminer. Paul, on vous entend pas.
Pardon, je ne parlerai pas d'intelligence artificielle, c'est trop grand, mais je vais parler de 5G. Je pense que c'est très important. C'est aussi important de reconnaître que Telesat ici au Canada, mais aussi SpaceX aux États-Unis, crée des constellations de satellites à basse orbite qui vont créer qu'on aura l'Internet très rapide partout au Canada, même dans le Grand Nord, même dans les communautés indigènes. Et ça va nous permettre de repenser comment on organise nos équipes. Être capable d'embaucher quelqu'un dans des petites communautés, dans des villages, être capable de permettre à tout le monde d'accéder au système éducationnel et à leur carrière sans déménager et sans besoin comme dans les communautés indigènes, sans besoin de tourner leur dos sur leur communauté et leur langue et partir pour la grande ville. Ça va vraiment changer comment on organise nos équipes, comment on organise nos entreprises. Et pour moi, je suis très excité à propos de ça. Et c'est permis parce que on va avoir le réseau tout partout où ça va être nécessaire. Alors, 5G va dans les villes et les constellations à basse orbite partout pour couvrir le reste.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. Merci beaucoup, Elisabeth. Je redonne maintenant la parole à Colin pour terminer le webinaire.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the audience. I think that we didn't have time to get to all of the great questions. Thank you to one of our award-winning researchers and faculty, Lysanne, for moderating, and to two of our esteemed Telfer alumni, Elizabeth and Paul, for your insight and candid words today. We do have a number of other Telfer Talks coming up in July, so look out for those, and you can always look at our calendar of events on our website. And please keep an eye out for the post-event survey that will come in an email later on today. And as we've mentioned, a recording and the presentation will be following in the coming days as well. So thank you, merci, bonne journée, have a great day, everyone.